evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, March 1st, 2011. It's 6:30 p.m. We're at the Palm Coast Community Center for the regularly scheduled meeting of the Palm Coast Mayor and City Council. Would you please rise and join me in a Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Roll call, please.
Mayor Netz?
Here.
Vice Mayor Meeker?
Here.
Councilmember DeStefano? Here. Councilmember Lewis?
Here.
Councilmember Mormon?
Here.
Mayor, all members are present.
Thank you very much. First item on the agenda is the approval of the February 15th City Council meeting and the February 22nd City Council workshop. Are there any additions, corrections, or is there a motion to approve?
I move adoption.
Second. Moved and second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries without objection. Agenda item number 2. Is Christopher Cooper in attendance? Christopher Cooper. Christopher Cooper. If Christopher is not here, then I'll read this proclamation from the front of the room. Whereas Christopher Cooper is a citizen of Palm Coast and a 15-year-old student at Flagler Palm Coast High School. And whereas on Monday, January 24th, 2011, a cardiac arrest occurred at his home. And whereas Christopher took charge of the situation and calmly called 911. And whereas Christopher began performing CPR following the instructions of the dispatcher until medical units arrived. And whereas Christopher stepped forward in a stressful emergency situation to save the life of a distressed person. Now therefore be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Palm Coast that Christopher Cooper is commended for his service to humanity and for his courageous and selfless efforts to preserve human life. Dated this first day of March 2011, and my pleasure to sign this as Mayor of the City. Chief, if you'd be kind enough to be sure that Christopher gets that. Everybody take a CPR course, please. You never know. Agenda item number 3, proclamation recognizing February 28th to March 4th as National Invasive Species Awareness Month. Mr. Meeker.
Is there a non-native invasive plant expert here other than myself? Hey. Whereas the City of Palm Coast recognizes the value of preserving the City of Palm Coast's unique natural lands and its rare species and native plant communities and wildlife for this generation and future generations. And whereas the City of Palm Coast commits to providing a high quality of life, which includes respecting and promoting and protecting the natural environment. And whereas invasive non-native plants and animals negatively impact native plants, animals, and local agricultural and ecotourism industries by displacing native plant communities, altering hydrologic regimes and the functions of wetlands and waterways, and degrading habitat from native wildlife and the appearance and enjoyment of natural landscapes. And whereas the annual cost of invasive non-native species to the United States economy is an estimated $120 billion per year, and the annual cost of impacts and control efforts are estimated at equaling 5% of the world's economy. And whereas Florida public agencies spend more than $102 million each year on managing invasive species, and whereas the City of Palm Coast recognizes that invasive species pose a potential threat to the preservation of the native ecology of the region, whereas the City of Palm Coast has developed educational programs to heighten invasive species awareness that include Drawing the Line, which is the Long Creek Invasive for Natives Exchange, and the Air Potato Roundup. Now therefore be it proclaimed that the City Council of the City of Palm Coast does hereby proclaim the first week of March 2001 National Invasive Species Awareness Week, adopted the first day of March 2001, signed by the Mayor. Gentlemen, comment? Yes.
Thank you very much. My name's Gary Swank. I'm a Park Service Specialist with the Guana Tulamata Matanzas National Estuary Research Reserve, otherwise known as GTM.
Just say everybody repeat after me. Yeah.
GTM. On behalf of GTM, I want to thank you for supporting and acknowledged in a very worthwhile cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I wanted to say something, too, on behalf of the city. I'm glad we got a good audience here to hear this because it's good to get the word out about invasive plants. The city kicked this off a little early last week. Our green team went to Belterre Elementary School and did a presentation to about 120 students explaining what invasive plants are, invasive species, how they can affect the environment and their lives. So they were very interested in that. And then at the same time, Gary was out with two of our public works employees at Longs Creek Estuary, and they were treating Brazilian pepper. So, we're starting to hit this hard and get a handle on it before it gets away from us. And we just want to let everybody know if you think you have an invasive plant, a Brazilian pepper, air potato, anything else out there, some of that Chinese tallow, you can call the city and ask for the green team, and one of the members will assist you in how to treat that. And in some instances, Gary can help. In other instances, the city can help. So appreciate you letting us broadcast this and let people know about invasive plants and species. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4, resolution accepting the comprehensive annual financial report for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2010. Mr. Landon.
Mayor, City Council. This is our annual audit, and it's a little unusual in the fact that it's a resolution, but it's not really a resolution. You approve the audit, you just accept the audit because it's obviously prepared by an independent firm. I am very pleased that once again we have a excellent financial report because we have an excellent finance department, and I'm trying to figure. I usually would introduce Ray. Ray, am I about ready to introduce you, or are you? I'm going to introduce Chris. Okay. We obviously didn't rehearse this. So Chris Quinn, our chief accountant, who really does all the work in the finance department.
There you go, Ray.
We'll introduce auditors, and they will make the presentation. No pressure, just a large crowd. So
Yeah.
that's okay.
Now we know why Ray gets kicked out.
James Halloran is here from our CPA firm, James Moore and Company, to present the audit findings to the council and to the public, and I'm going to let him take it from here while we work out our technical difficulties.
All right, thank you. Again, James Halloran with James Moore and Company. This is the audit for the City of Palm Coast for the year ended September 30th, 2010. First, I'd like to thank Chris and Ray, both for helping us with the audit, getting all the staff having their stuff together for us, making a very smooth audit. The audit is about a half month earlier than it was in the previous year, so that's a great accomplishment for you guys. Also with me tonight is Lisa Bottleman. She was the audit manager on the engagement. She's with me as well. And there we go. Perfect timing. Your audit report, the comprehensive annual financial report, there's 3 different reports that are presented by James Moore and Company. The financial statements are the city's financial statements. They're prepared by city staff. We have 3 different audit reports that are included in there. One is the opinion on the financial statements. You have an unqualified opinion on the financial statements, which is the highest opinion we can give as certified public accountants. That is the opinion that you want. It states that your financial statements present fairly in all material aspects, your financial position, and results of operations. Also, as part of your audit, you're under government auditing standards, a higher level of auditing standards than just a U.S. Auditing standards. So with that, there's an additional internal control and compliance report. As well, the City of Palm Coast receives over $500,000 in federal funding, so they're also subject to the Federal Single Audit Act. The internal control and compliance report, we noted no material instances of noncompliance. In the internal control of financial reporting, we have 2 findings. One was a prior period adjustment related to land, and this was actually caught by the city staff prior to the audit. But anytime there's a restatement of the prior period financial statements, it's required to be included as a finding. It related back to land that was originally contributed when the city was started, land that came over from Flagler County. The second comment relates to revenue accruals related to the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. This related to an FDOT grant where the revenue and receivable at year end were not recorded to match those expenditures going out. There were 2 prior year significant deficiencies. Both of them were resolved in the current year. There's also a management letter required by the Auditor General of the State of Florida and goes through about 20 different items we're required to report back on. There are no repeat comments. There was a comment in the previous year, and that was also resolved. So that is good to know. And we had no current year comments in the Auditor General letter. For your federal single audit, they had 1 significant deficiency. It's repeated twice, the same one on the FDOT grant revenue, receivable and revenue, but we're required to report it in both places because it relates back to federal awards. The financial health of the city. The overall financial health of the city, based on the Auditor General's financial indicator analysis, is average or inconclusive. So it means over time, you're at least average compared to other sizable cities with similar services and also to yourself over the past 5 years. Of important note is the City of Palm Coast took a step actually last year to implement a fund balance policy. A lot of governments are now struggling with this, trying to come up with, okay, what's our philosophy? How much do we retain each year to keep for the rainy days? So Palm Coast is ahead of the curve in that area, and your general fund and utility fund are in compliance with that fund balance policy, which sets a minimum threshold of 10% and a max of 20%. But your stormwater, golf course, and tennis center are all not in compliance with that policy at this time, and there's works in place to get those corrected. Highlights for this year on the financial statements. The city early implemented a new accounting standard, which changes the fund balance terminology in the governmental funds. Previously, you had unreserved fund balance, reserved fund balance, and designated fund balance. Now you'll see unassigned, assigned, committed, and restricted fund balances. So if you're looking back at one from a previous year, it's not going to look exactly the same, so you'll have to get comfortable with those new terminologies. The general fund, that's your main operating fund. What happened with that fund during the year? Well, during the year, it decreased by approximately $6.6 million. Majority of that was a transfer out that created the building permit and inspections fund. About $5.9 million of that related back to that transfer to start the building inspection fund. Property taxes for the year increased just slightly, about $400,000. Other taxes also went up about $1.3 million, primarily due to franchise fees. In your previous year, your franchise fees for solid waste were kept in the solid waste fund, and this year they were transferred over to the general fund. Impact fees. During the boom area of the whole state of Florida, and of course you guys in Palm Coast, you collected a tremendous amount of impact fees. This past year and in previous years, you've spent a tremendous amount of money of those impact fees that were collected. This year you spent approximately $13 million of those impact fees. There are minimal balances left in those impact fee funds. Less than $1 million are left in those impact fee funds, and some of those funds actually are in a deficit situation right now. New funds that were created during the year, the Building Permit Inspection Fund, as I mentioned before, along with the IT&C Fund, this is your Information Technology Fund, and also self-insured health insurance. About the last 3 months of the year, starting July 1st, the city went to a self-insured health insurance plan as opposed to buying insurance directly from an insurer. So that's in its infancy stage, and it was a step to take some cost-cutting benefits to see if that will save some money for the city on health insurance. Some other items of note is advances to other funds. Overall, about $20 million has been loaned out to other funds, and you'll see the general fund loaned $5.8 million to the State Road 100 CRA. Capital Projects Fund has loaned money to a number of different funds. The golf course, $5.5 million, $1.8 million to IT&C, and $2.1 million to the Transportation Impact Fee Fund. And Utility Fund loaned $5.2 million to the OKR Special Assessment, Old Kings Road Special Assessment Fund. This was done, the city could have borrowed the money externally, but they decided to let's borrow internally. As opposed to paying interest to a bank and paying someone outside the government for that, they can borrow internally, and the money can be used inside the funds to earn interest at a better rate than they right now could get at a banking institution. Highlights for long-term debt. Normal pay down on your debt principal and payments. You're in compliance with all your debt covenants. But new loans for the year, $4 million loan taken out on the State Road 100 CRA, and also an additional $5.7 drawn on the line of credit in the Stormwater Fund. Well, where are you at today? Your general fund unassigned fund balance is approximately $2.4 million. You didn't appropriate use any of that fund balance going into your 2010 or 11 budget. So as a percentage of expenditures for 2010, you're at about 9%. When you add in transfers, you're about 7%. That's primarily because of that large transfer going to the Building and Permit Inspection Fund. And if you look at that as a percentage going forward of your 2011 budget, you're at 9%. Now, that does not include your disaster reserve. You have a committed disaster reserve fund as well, and that's about $2.2 million. So between the two of those, you have about 2 months of operating expenses is what you have there. I try to make it short and sweet because I figured probably everyone wasn't here to hear me speak today.
Are there any council questions?
I got mine
Council
handled.
questions? Seeing none, let's open the meeting to the public. Anyone from the public wish to be heard on, excuse me, agenda item number 4? Please give us your name and limit your contribution to 3 minutes.
Good evening, Jason DiLorenzo, Flagler Home Builders Association. This is basically the same comment I made February 17th of 2009. This is the only time, I understand that you're accepting this audit and you can't do anything to it, change it or anything, but I don't know how anybody is supposed to make an actual public comment to a document that is not available for review before the public comment portion of the program. That is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll close the public portion of the meeting, come back to council. Is there a motion to accept the comprehensive annual financial report?
I'll motion to accept the audit.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries without objection. Before we move to agenda item 5, I've been told that Christopher Cooper and his family have arrived, so I wonder if they could just come forward so we could recognize them. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Would you like to say something to the folks?
I didn't really think of it anything at the time. It was not a big deal. The way I thought of it, it was just natural instinct. But I'm glad he's here still. We didn't lose him. Thank you. Thank you.
Again, congratulations. Agenda item number 5, presentation of certificates to the graduating students from the Palm Coast Citizens Academy class. Citizens Academy, Marcia, we are in the 21st class since incorporation as a city. We hold 3 of these a year, 4 of these a year, 3 of these a year. It's an opportunity for residents to participate, come in, and kind of get a look at the city from the inside out. And I know when I first went through Citizens Academy, not as a citizen, but as a council member, I learned some things that I didn't know about the city. So, Marcia, without any further ado.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I am very honored and proud to present to you tonight our 21st graduating class for Citizens Academy. And actually, this is our largest graduating class for Citizens Academy. We had 37 students in this class. Would you like to come up? And as we call your name, please come forward, accept your certificate, and then stand up in front so we can get a photo, okay? We got everybody? Yeah, we need a class picture. Okay, you ready, guys? Okay. Is Lisa Asbill here? I'm not quite sure who found places to park and who didn't. Mary Beck?
Congratulations.
Robert Beck?
Congratulations, sir.
Gloria Benjamin?
Congratulations.
And Roy Benjamin. Patricia Bottoms. Marge Collins. Sybil Daniel. Paul Dean. Robert DeWick. Mamie Godfrey. Helen Goldbach. Stephen Goldblatt. Patricia Griffith.
No problem.
Sure. I know the feeling.
Robert Knapp. Mavis Krause. John Lucas Jr. Sybil Dotson Lucas. Linda McDonald. Donna Parent Phillips. Adolph Parker. Tony Pellegrini. Then his wife. Carol. Is Carol here? Or Tony? Charles Rafter. Lawrence Record. Patricia Record. Manuel Rentas.
Beautiful program.
Ernest Roberts. Soon. Kenneth Rowe. Gus Sarney. Clifford Selke. Kimberly Small. Kim Small. Is she here? Mary Valelli. Thank you. Joseph Valelli. Lee Willman. You're welcome. Congratulations, everyone.
Before I ask you to scrunch together, we're going to try to do a picture. I'd just like to comment for everybody. As we were handing out the certificates, half a dozen people said, wonderful program, great program, words to that effect. Marcia coordinates it. She brings together the speakers that are going to be presenters, arranges for the nice dinner that you folks get. So Marcia really takes all the credit. Now, 3 rows deep, I guess, guys. Council members, would you join us? We'll take the backpack.
I know. Did you bring a ladder truck? I don't think you're going to catch this one. I don't know. You're all really going to have to be best friends. Best friends.
Yeah, I've been through this once or twice.
You got to hold her up. Yeah, I've done this once or twice. Hold Mark up high.
One more. That was good. A little bit more. Squish it better.
Closer.
One more.
Left, your other left.
Thank you, Marshall.
Great class. Thanks so much, hon. Thanks for encouraging Marshall. That was great. Thank you. That was a great job, Marshall.
Good to be with you.
It was indeed wonderful program.
Thank you. Marcia, thank you so much. Thank you.
Citizens Academy members, you don't have to stay for the balance of the meeting if you don't want to. I'll give you that option. Yeah, I was hoping to free up some chairs. Pardon? Okay. Okay, agenda item number 6. An ordinance repealing an ordinance 2004-15 and adopting revised stormwater utility ordinance. Mr. Reichman.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. This is an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Palm Coast, Florida, amending and restating Chapter 24, Article 3, Division 3, Stormwater Management Utility of the Code of Ordinances, providing for conflict severability, codification, and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Mr. Landon.
Mayor, City Council, and obviously the audience, because I think this is what most people are here for, obviously. We're going to do a three-step.
Look up louder, please.
We are going to do a three-step review of this issue. I'm going to start off with kind of general the history of the stormwater system and ordinances and utility. John Moden, our Director of Engineering and Stormwater, is going to talk about the history specific to Palm Coast and Grand Haven, because I believe most of these people are from Grand Haven. Ray Britt is also going to talk a little bit about the specific history here in Palm Coast as far as the financing of our stormwater system. They're going to turn it back over to me, and I'm going to talk about specific proposals and the issues that we understand that a lot of the people here tonight are interested in. The stormwater system in the United States really changed drastically when the Clean Water Act was adopted at the federal level. Before, stormwater systems in cities were designed to strictly try to transfer water out of the city to minimize flooding. The Clean Water Act said that you had to not just get rid of the quantity of the water, but you had to treat the quality of the water as it hit the natural system. So EPA started imposing rules on cities for treating stormwater. And that obviously kicked up the cost significantly on cities, and it changed the game as to what cities, how they funded their stormwater systems. So what was common throughout the United States, and every community I've been in has gone through this process, we started establishing stormwater utilities, and we started viewing stormwater as a utility similar to water and sewer. And there was an additional charge commonly placed on a utility bill. Right now you have one for water, you have one for sewer, you have one for garbage, and you have one for stormwater. That was something that was established many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, as the Clean Water Act came into place. Nothing uncommon. It was actually quite successful in funding the requirements of the Clean Water Act. What was also very common was that it was usually a flat fee. Everybody paid the same. It wasn't based on whether you use the system or not, just everybody paid the same. And that was exactly what started here in Palm Coast before we were ever a city. And that there was a flat fee across the board, and that flat fee was charged to everyone. The problem with the flat fee is when it went through the court system, as cities were challenged with a flat fee and calling it a fee, and it wasn't based on whether you actually use the system, is the court says that that's not a fee, that's a tax. And if you look at it, that's exactly what taxes do, is whether you use the streets, whether you use the schools, whether you use anything, everybody has to pay the tax. And so the courts gave cities an option. You can either treat it as a true tax and put it on the ad valorem tax, the property taxes, and have everybody pay through their property tax, or you treat it as a true user fee, where you charge a fee based on whether or not you use the system. And if there is different degrees of use, then you have to have different degrees of fees, and therefore fee schedules started happening. And the courts, and this is fairly recently, said that cities have to make that change. And they did not say which one you had to do, but if you're going to keep it be standard across the board for everybody, it had to be attached to your property taxes, or you could start working on changing your fee structure so that only the people who use the system pay. So here in Palm Coast, we inherited this system. This wasn't a system that was established by the city. It was actually established long before by ITT, before we were a city, and we inherited that system. We also, about the time we inherited the system, inherited court cases that said we had to change, that I just described. And those changes are difficult. We have been in this process for 3 years now almost. This next month, I think next month or two, would have been 3 years to try to get through this very difficult process of changing this fee structure. City Council has asked us not to attach it to the property tax, so therefore we move forward with trying to differentiate between people who use the stormwater system maintained by the city and those people who do not use the stormwater system. If you have your own stormwater system, but it flows into our system, then you get a credit because and there's a number of other credits. And it has to be based on technical science, and that's what we've been going through for quite some time now, almost 3 years. City Council has had numerous workshops on this. We've had public hearings. We have, you might say, winners and losers. There are people who their fees will go down. Grand Haven, for example, with the current proposal, would have majority of it, at least those on the east side of Colbert Lane, their fee would go down to zero because they don't use our system. They don't have their flow into our system. There are other people who have not been paying who will have to pay now because they do use our system, but because of a loophole in the previous ordinances established, once again, what we inherited, established while we were a county, those people would have to start paying, and those people do not want to start paying, and we've had some interesting challenges. City Council has adopted the proposed ordinance in first reading and asked city staff to make changes, and we believe we've made all those changes. Then, of course, just recently, I think over the weekend, there was some information that was distributed throughout, particularly Grand Haven, that caused this crowd today. And so what we would like to do now is talk a little bit about Grand Haven, because Grand Haven has always been treated differently long before, well, I don't know about long, but before we were a city, and the city inherited that system. And that system was actually something that ITT got started when we were still unincorporated county. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John and let him talk about the details of our history here in Palm Coast, in particular Grand Haven.
I'll start out with the history of maintenance of the drainage system after ITT Community Development Corporation. In November of 1991, ITT Community Development Corporation formed what they call Palm Coast Community Service Corporation, and that was done through the authority vested in them by the deed restrictions placed on each of the lots within Palm Coast. The functions of that organization were to maintain the drainage system outside the road right-of-way. In addition, they had the enforcement of deed restrictions, and they acted as the architectural committee. Then in 1999, the city, of course, was incorporated, and Palm Coast Community Service Corporation still existed and still functioned as a separate entity. In 2004, October of 2004, the city formed their own stormwater utility. And then in 2005, June of 2005, the Palm Coast Community Service Corporation dissolved and transferred its assets to the city of Palm Coast. In that period between 2004 and 2005, Palm Coast Community Service Corporation kept functioning as they always had. Prior to that time, they had a program with Grand Haven where they provided a base level of service equitable to what they were providing to other residents and lots that were subject to the fee, the Palm Coast Community Service Corporation fee. And basically, they provided this level of service at the direction of Grand Haven. At that time, I believe they were spraying, applying herbicides and treating the stormwater ponds there. And a portion of it was paid for by fees that were collected by Palm Coast Community Service Corporation. That program continued until 2008, and in which time we reimbursed Grand Haven CDD for basically to pay for a base level of service for the stormwater system. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ray Britt to give the history of the fee itself.
Thanks, John. From the city side, of course, the city was incorporated in 1999. Went along several years with no stormwater fee, and in 2004, a stormwater fee was put in place by the city. It was pretty much brought on by the fact that we were beginning to have pipe failures, and that kind of brought to the city's attention that there were going to be problems with the infrastructure of the stormwater system, and we had to have a funding source to pay for the maintenance of that system. The first major pipe failure I remember was Florida Park Drive. It just caved in one day, pretty much, and took a couple of months to actually get it replaced. So in 2004, the city did put in a stormwater fee. The stormwater fee started out at $3 per residence at that time. As John said, the city took over absorbed the Service Corporation in June of 2005. Now, the Service Corporation charged an annual fee. At the time, it was $35 per year, and they billed on a calendar year. So the Service Corporation had billed for calendar year 2005. And at the end of 2005, in January of 2006, the city then combined their fee with the city's fee of $3 per month, and the Service Corp fee was basically $3 per month. So that became, on January of 2006, that became a $6 monthly fee at that point in time. In October of 2008, and actually during the budget process getting ready for 2008, council discussed additional needed improvements to the stormwater system, and at that time it was determined that we needed to accelerate some of the maintenance on the stormwater system, specifically pipe replacements, canal maintenance, stormwater or swale maintenance, valley gutters, any number of things. So at that time it was decided that we would pursue a loan of about $9 million to go over a 3-year period to make these improvements. And in order to pay that loan, it was determined that we needed to increase the monthly fee from $6 to $8 per month. So that went up to $8 in October of 2008, and that is where we are at this point in time.
Great. Okay. Now when it comes to where we are today, this ordinance is attempting to create a true user fee, and I think it, according to our attorneys and our technical staff, it meets that test. And there are many credits that people can apply for. And there are definitely areas that, and Grand Haven's one of them, but not the only one. There are other areas that their stormwater system flows directly into the intercoastal, and therefore we are taking them out of our service area. This first came up in 2008. It came up when a large property owner, or a combination of large property owners, primarily developers, hired an attorney to challenge the city's stormwater fee. And at that time, we acknowledged that we needed to make the changes that were outlined by the Florida Supreme Court. The idea was when we acknowledged that we needed to make the change, this is one of those where hindsight, I kind of wish I had not made that statement. I said, well, if you won't sue us, then we will pursue the changes. And I presented to City Council the idea that we would then set aside dollars, and we wouldn't pursue payment of some of these fees that were on an annual basis if they wouldn't sue us, and we set aside dollars with the idea we would make the new fee retroactive to when they put us on notice, and I believe it's March or April of 2008. April of 2008. So that's what we did. So that's where the April 2008 date came from. We have proceeded difficultly, obviously, and we are now in that stage where we are trying very hard to make the transition from what is a flat fee across the board, better known as a tax, to real fee. We've agreed to pay people back to 2008. That's what's in the ordinance. I know one issue that is out there when it comes to residential, and Grand Haven's one of them, but there are others, is that how are we going to pay residents back that have been paying since that April 2008 timeline? And we have, in the ordinance it says it would be handled administratively, and we want to be very flexible. And so what we are proposing and will do for the residential area, and I want to stress this is strictly residential because commercial is a different animal for us, but with residential there's two ways it can happen. The resident themselves can send us a note saying that they would like a credit or a refund and be reimbursed for the fees they charged, that they paid since April 2008. We would also accept a similar request from a homeowners association. And then the homeowners association could decide one of two things. One, we could write the check to the homeowners association if that's their choice, or they could, representing all the residents, say, no, we want the city to give a credit to each individual account. And this would be an existing account, and we would provide that credit to those individual accounts. It would be different because it depends on how long you've been here. I mean, if it would be, and we know when you open the account, and we would give you a credit on your utility bill for that amount. If after you get the credit you say, no, you want a check, we would write you a check too, if that's what you would prefer. So trying to be very flexible and allow for individual desires. If you are not a current customer, meaning you aren't represented by the current HOA, but in other words, you left, but you were here in 2008, 2009, 10, doesn't matter how long, then those individuals would have to send us a note individually, because those individuals not being customers will be very difficult to track down, and they will need to send us their address as to where we send them a check. And I doubt we have any of those people in the audience right now, because they are usually moved out and gone. So trying to address that one issue right now is that's up to the individual neighborhoods as to how they would like to handle it, and we will stay very flexible. But if individuals who paid the bill want the credit, it only makes sense that they would get the credit, and we plan to do that. That's the easy one. Now for the more difficult issue, and that is the issue of, well, I've been paying taxes since 2004 and have not been getting my fair share of the benefit. And we've heard, we want the refund to go back to 2004. Why that is extremely difficult is that, we knew come 2008 to set money aside. But the fact of it is that the dollars that were collected in 2004, 5, 6, and 7, they've already been spent, as has been indicated. You actually heard the financial report that our stormwater fund, high demand for those improvements. And this would be similar to, but at a lot lower level, is if, let's say, school district decided to go by a user fee, and you would only have to pay for schools education if you had children using the school system. And a lot of people like that idea. Why do I pay a tax when I don't have any kids in the school system? So, but just think about it. If you then said, all right, but we want that reimbursement all the way back to 2004 and expect the school district to come up with paying everybody for the taxes they paid all the way back to 2004. Much larger scale, but the same concept. So what we are trying to do is be fair and go back to 2008, and we set those dollars aside since this time, but we didn't have dollars that set all the way back to 2004. With that said, a good city manager always gives his city council options, and there are options. You aren't required to give a refund at all, first of all. It was something we agreed to do, but this is an ordinance, which is legislation at a local level, and once you adopt the new fee, then the new fee becomes effective as outlined here, which we're proposing May 1st. You are not required by law to make those fees retroactive. It's an interesting challenge because it's always a one-way street. You can't raise the fees for the people that didn't pay their fair share and say, okay, now we're going to collect all the way back to 2004, but you do have that option of reimbursing at some retroactive date. If you have that option to adopt this ordinance, and we would proceed with the reimbursement of the fee back to 2008. Once again, not just Grand Haven, but throughout. The cost of that we are estimating to be in the $1.5 million to $2 million range, a significant amount. If, probably closer to 2 million. If you were to go back to 2004, that would kick up to the total cost we're estimating would be another additional million, million and a half, or around $3 million. We do not have $3 million in the stormwater fund, as that was not anticipated. So if tonight you want to contemplate going back to 2004, which is your option, I will tell you, you can not adopt this ordinance because you don't have the funds appropriated for it. You would have to go back and do a budget amendment for stormwater that would do one of two things. Significantly continue to charge the rest of the community their stormwater fee, but significantly cut back the program. And as you know, the program is your pipe replacement, your swell rehab, the weirs that are blowing out, the valley gutter replacement. Those are where these dollars go to. And you can put a hold on those and continue to charge a fee, but you will have to make significant cuts to make that happen. Your other option, of course, would be to raise the fee on everybody else in order to raise the $1 to $1.5 million and go back to 2004. I want to stress that the 2004 fee was a tax. I mean, there's just no way, he doesn't like me saying that because it was called a fee, but when you have a flat across the board, doesn't matter whether you use the system or not, the courts have said you can't do that. Converting from a tax to a fee is a real challenge, and to make it retroactive. And that's what you're facing today. So you're going to hear a lot tonight, and it makes going to make a lot of sense that why do I have to pay if I don't use it? Same concept with schools, the same concepts with a number of other taxes out there. But I also need to let you know that you have to be financially able to make that commitment. And if you want to direct us to go a different direction, whether that's creating adding it to property tax or raising fees, etc., you can give us that direction. But that's kind of where we are tonight. Hopefully we got all the other issues that we've been dealing with for 3 years out of the way, but still have this one.
Before we proceed, just so the audience will understand what our procedures are, at this point, after staff makes its presentation, there's an opportunity for council questions. After we've answered any council questions, then we open the meeting to the public. The public can either ask questions or offer comments. We will ask each person to give us your name, limit your contribution to 3 minutes. If you have a question, we will aggregate the questions, and at the end of public discussion, answer as many questions as we can do, assuming we have answers. If you have comments rather than questions, we will listen very attentively to your comments. After the public portion is closed, we come back to council for additional questions, council comments, or a motion on, in this case, the ordinance. So at this point, are there any council questions? Mrs. DeStefano.
Mr. Brett, we in the presentation, I just want to re-clarify for the audience. If I understand correctly, you said from 2005 to 2008, the city of Palm Coast provided money to Grand Haven for the base level of service. Am I correct?
That's correct.
And that money would have come from the residents in Grand Haven having paid us their monthly fee. And from that fee, you would have provided money back to the CDD in Grand Haven. Is that correct?
Right. Their fee would have gone into the stormwater fund, which paid the money back to the CDD, yes.
So then, if we went back to 04, you would have to, the resident has to understand that they would not be getting whatever they paid in, but it would have to be deducted from the money we gave Grand Haven to handle their level of service.
There would need to be some type of adjustment somehow, yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure we, so that's another reason why we're going to 08 as opposed to going back to 04. Because there was money provided to CDD for the Grand Haven to maintain a level, base level of service.
Well, I mean, the 08 date was determined by when we received notification.
Right.
It just happened that that also was the last year that we provided money to
But we
Grand
provided
Haven.
money for 3 years, is that correct?
Right, after the
05 to
after the
08.
Service Corp came
Okay.
over, yes.
All right, so there was money given back to the CDD. Thank you.
Other council questions? Mr. Meeker?
Well, that was one of my questions as well, so that handled that. I'm just curious, how is maintenance, this is probably a John question really, but how is maintenance of the common road area drainage? When I say common road area drainage, I'm going to pick a number of roads like Palm Coast Parkway, Belterre, Matanzas Woods Parkway, Pine Lakes Parkway. How is the maintenance of the stormwater drainage systems in the right-of-ways on either side of those handled? Does it come out of the general fund, or does it come out of stormwater utility dollars? And the reason I ask the question is that's a benefit that all the residents of Palm Coast get. If you had to get out of town in an emergency or something, and, for example, there's a culvert that you and I know about that runs from McDonald's to the St. Joe Canal. And if that was to fail during a catastrophic storm event, I assume the intersection goes underwater and nobody's getting out of that area. So somebody has to maintain that. Who gets stuck with that cost?
I think we've determined at this point that it's pretty much the stormwater department or fund will handle that. Pine Lakes Parkway, you basically got ditches on either side of there, earthen ditches that are maintained by the funds from the Stormwater Enterprise Fund, Stormwater Utility. So I would have to say, 99% of the time you're talking about funds from the Stormwater Utility to maintain the drainage.
And Palm Coast Parkway east and west?
Palm Coast Parkway east and west. If a pipe fails, again, we're splitting hairs here because I can't answer the question. If you have debris down in the roadway and it's blocking the flow in the gutter, Public Works will probably go pick it up. Will it be the stormwater crew or will it be a Public Works road crew? I can't give you the answer to that. That I can't tell you. But if a pipe failed, I can tell you it would be the stormwater utility that would correct it.
All right,
or replace it.
prior to getting to Grand Haven itself, if you're headed south on Colbert Lane and you cross Ditch 10, there's a culvert system there that was permitted under the Phase 1 of Colbert Lane. Who maintains that?
The stormwater utility.
Not the county.
What are we talking about? Ditch 10 or
Colbert? Well,
Colbert Lane. Colbert Lane is maintained at that point by the county, and they have done. I know there was some erosion by the culvert pipes and head walls under Ditch 10 or adjacent to Ditch 10. It was in the right of way, and the county took care of it.
All right. If debris was to come down Ditch 10 and form a blockage there prior to hitting Colbert Lane, water stacks up and blows out the thing. I guess what I'm saying is who's responsible for Ditch 10 upstream of that? Us, I assume.
Right? You are correct, and that has happened. We've had trees that have fallen down into Ditch 10 upstream of Colbert Lane, and we've removed them.
All right. So if something happens in that area, the emergency access out is south on Colbert Lane to State Road 100 then, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Lewis.
John, prior to the city taking over from the corporation, did the city provide any service during that period prior to providing the service to the corporation and Grand Haven prior to taking it over?
Yes, it did.
And what type of service was that?
We had worked with Grand Haven and their administration at that time, I believe it was with the CDD, to pay a portion of the fee. They had a level of maintenance that they wanted that was very high. Basically, it was herbicide application to the stormwater ponds. At that time, we were providing a level of service while we were spraying our canals, let's say 3 times a year. And Grand Haven was spraying their ponds 12 times a year. So we said, well, it's only fair that we pay for a portion of that, and the portion that we pay for is 3 times a year. That would be comparable to. So we tried to make it equitable and provide that base level of service that we were providing to all of Palm Coast.
Okay.
Mr. Mormon.
Mr. Landon, you mentioned if we went back to 2004, that would be another $1.5 million that we would need to repay that amount. What would be the ramifications? We have to borrow that money? Where is that $1.5 million going to come from, and how is it going to get repaid?
Well, I think that's what I was trying to say. You'd have, actually, I can tell you have 3 options. One of them would be to basically halt your stormwater program, which means you lay off employees and put all the equipment we've purchased and park it until you collected enough of the fees from the rest of the community to be able to come up with those dollars. Second option would be to raise the stormwater fee on the rest of the community. The third option would be you can use your general fund. You can use your general tax dollars and transfer those general tax dollars into stormwater. Now, as you well know, with all the decreases we've had in the general fund, now you're talking quite a ripple effect as to there's other things you're going to have to cut in order to make that type of transfer. So those are the only 3 options that I know of that you would have to decide very difficult options before you could change the ordinance to make that kind of financial commitment.
This one from Mr. Reichman. Now, you had mentioned the ordinance that we have tonight takes it to April of 2008. If we determined that we're going to go to 2004, Mr. Landon had said that this ordinance doesn't address that. What would be the ramification of doing something other than what's in the ordinance?
We have 2 different considerations, Councilmember. First of all, the specific reference to 2008 for your purposes in the agenda package is found on page 10 of 16. At least it's on my page 10. I actually still bring paper. You guys are probably working off your computer. But the bottom line is it does say that the credits would be retroactive to April 8, 2008. In my legal opinion, while you could, under Chapter 166, make that change back to 2004 from a standpoint of the adoption of the ordinance, I would agree with your city manager that you do not have in a budget, from a budget standpoint, the necessary foundation to adopt an ordinance where there is not funding available. In other words, you would be approving an expenditure of funds that you have not appropriately budgeted for. So while there's 2 aspects of this. While you could make the change without violating the adoption procedures of Chapter 166, there would be a problem if you went forward and amended this ordinance, changing the date from 2008 to 2004, because the financial implications, the financial consequences would affect your budget.
Thank you.
My understanding, Mr. Reichman, is only the federal government can do that. Spend money they don't have budgeted. Mr. Lewis.
Mr. Landon, if you were to go to 2004 and make that change, what will that do to the level of service down the road for Palm Coast?
Well, once again, this background history, City Council 2 weeks ago when they adopted the first reading of the ordinance, you took action that will reduce. We're estimating, and all this is estimates because this is all new. We are estimating that our revenue will be reduced by $700,000. This is once again with all the demands. If you look at your priorities, it's stormwater, stormwater, and stormwater because that's what the community has been demanding. And so we're already going to struggle with what are we going to do with the level of service. If with this and we lose $700,000, you're going to have to cut back on your level of service. You don't have it, you can't spend it. If you then add another $1.5 million, you've got some tough decisions. I mean, $1.5 million on top of 700,000. Now we're at 2.25, and the total budget this year, I believe, in stormwater is about $5 million. So you're basically cutting, half of the program overnight, and you don't cut half of a program when it comes to replacing pipes, your swales. And I want to stress to people, when Florida Park Drive blows out, and it's happened to us more than once, that's your stormwater funds that are paying for that. That's not a street fund. That's not a tax fund. Mulberry Branch blew out. All of those things, because we have a 30 to 40-year-old infrastructure that's very, very old. All over town, we have pipes that aren't there any longer. It's basically an earthen hole where the pipe used to be because it's corroded. And when we get a heavy rain, it erodes around that and the street caves in. If that's your street and you can't get home that night, you're willing to pay that $8. But the fact of it is that a lot of people, nobody's ever dug out my swell or done anything in my yard, so it is a tough one. But these type of figures would drastically reduce what we can do in the stormwater and the progress we've made, and it will very likely end up impacting your general fund, because when that street does blow out, you're going to have to come up with funds somewhere to get the people back to their homes. That's why this is not an easy issue. This is why it's taken us 3 years to do this. This is really a challenge for us.
Other council questions?
Actually, I did have
Mr. Meeker.
One of the other options I was wondering about, what about state revolving loan fund? We took out, about $9 million there a couple of years back for something? Can we expand that some?
I'm going to let the finance director answer that.
The $9 million we borrowed was from a bank. We also have a stormwater revolving fund loan, but that can only be used for specific projects. In fact, for instance, we could not use that money for our swale rehab program. That's why we went to the bank, to give ourselves greater flexibility. So SRF loans are very limited as to what we can do with them. The other problem is, if you don't have the revenue, they ain't gonna loan you the money. They don't just give it out just because we're a city. We have to file financials with them, and we have to show that we can pay that money back. So right now, I wouldn't even attempt to get an SRF loan or a bank loan either.
And I'm trying to remember the name of the particular fund. I thought it was one of the funds that we set aside. Sorry, I should be over here where the mic is. Didn't we have, I'll call it a rainy day emergency fund that is supposed to be a certain percent of the stormwater fund's budget?
We have our reserve policy says that we want, just like with the general fund, we want to have between 10 and 20% in reserves in there. We do not in the stormwater fund. We've been spending the money in there just as fast as we take it in. We do have a disaster reserve fund, which has a couple of $1 million in it, but that's all, and that's to cover any disasters that happen in the city. For instance, right now we have a lot of fire danger out there. It could end up being used for something like that. So, that is there, but and I think that may be what the city manager was referring to whenever we talked about the pipes blowing out. That might be one source, but you can go through that pretty quick. I mean, when we got hit with the May rain event, we spent almost $1 million out of that fund, so it doesn't take long.
And I think my last question was, it's more of a discussion question. I'll hold it till the end, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Other council questions? Thank you for your patience. Now we're going to open the meeting to the public. Again, please approach the podium, give us your name, limit your contribution to 3 minutes. If you have questions, we will aggregate those questions until the end of the public portion of the meeting. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name's John Romaine. I am a Grand Haven resident since 1998. I'm listening diligently to several of the statements made to Mr. Landon. I would tell you Grand Haven is not a school district, so therefore it's a little different than your analogy. The people who were here from '98 and came along, and then we had go to '04 in regard to the money aspect of it. How are we going to pay it back? You don't have it. But we don't have money to build a building either, but you have $10 million for that. So I might suggest to you that you break some of that money and pay it back to the people of Grand Haven. If the money is there, it can be used, you should be able to do that. The other avenue is this. In today's climate, we as a community, city, Grand Haven, all the other private communities, are looking to get our fair share of what's fair. It has not been fair, as evident by what's being said here tonight, that we've been paying for stormwater protection since '04, and we're not using it. I think you've got to go back to the questions that were asked. Where's the money going to come from? How are we going to get the money? I think everybody should be refunded the money back from the time they were here, and we'll use '04 as an example. Going short term to '08 is like you putting your hand in my other pocket and taking my money out. And I don't think that's a fair analogy to what's going on over here. The city doesn't operate that way. I know you don't operate that way. So the end result is the people in Grand Haven need to get what's their due. Now, whether a pipe breaks on Palm Coast Parkway East and causes a problem, and it's done by the swale people, that's what the people in that community are paying for. If we have a pipe break in Grand Haven, you're not running out to Grand Haven and fixing Grand Haven. We have to pay for it. So therefore, I think we ought to think about it and let things go that way. Thank you.
My name is Toby Tobin. I'm a resident of Grand Haven. I think that, addressing the council, I think that you've gotten some poor advice, perhaps been misled a little bit by your engineering consultants, by your staff, and by your attorney. I think that the staff talked about the refund to the CDD and provided the basic level of service. Well, the basic level of service, they didn't say how much that was. I think it amounts to about $12,000 a year, and it was very minimal. From our standpoint, I know Mr. Reichman says that you don't have to give the money back at all, or you could go to 2,000. It's all up to you. That's his opinion. I've talked to other attorneys who feel otherwise, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that it is entirely up to you. I'd like you to look at it view it from our standpoint. If you're a Grand Haven resident, this is analogous to, let's say I owned a company, I hired an employee in 2004. In 2008, it came to my attention that employee had been embezzling from me. But because of restrictions, I couldn't bring charges. Because I had work rules, I couldn't fire him until the investigation was complete. Now here we are at 2011, and what you're trying to say is analogous to saying that, well, I can only collect the money back from the embezzler from the time at which I caught him, not from when he actually started taking the money out of my account.
Good evening. I'm Tom Lawrence. I live in Grand Haven, and I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of the Grand Haven Community Development District Board of Supervisors. You've agreed that Grand Haven is due a refund. They're due a refund because they paid utility fees and received no benefit. So we, the CDD, are asking that we be refunded for every year that we paid fees, and that would be from 2011 back to 2004. You can think of this as a loan from the Grand Haven CDD. It's now time to repay the loan, and we expect to be refunded 100% of the loan. We're not asking for any interest. You mentioned a base level of service. What we were reimbursed for in the CDD was for algae treatments. We do 12 a year. You reimbursed us for 3 of those, which is your standard level. I can assure you there's enough refund coming to more than cover that, so this will have no impact on any refund to the Grand Haven residents. Here's a thought. You were talking about money. Well, I heard earlier you've moved money from the general fund over to the town center CRA. You moved it to the golf course. Maybe you could move some of that back to the general fund and into the stormwater fund as a way to fund the stormwater shortfall. You moved it before, you can move it again. Last point is, in addition to our common property in Grand Haven, we have 1,901 residential properties. We have over 2,200 voters, and we're very active voters. We have been very patient. All of our residents are following this issue and expected you, our elected officials, to do the right thing for our community. I finally ask all the Grand Haven residents who are here to stand up, and those that are standing to raise their hand who agree with this point of view. And I can assure you, if you could look in the other room, you'd see a handful of people over there, too. Thank you.
Judy Hackstaff, a resident of Grand Haven. I'm also the president of the Homeowners Association, so I expect to be dealing with some of you very shortly. It's fair that you are going to eliminate the fees. However, the billing and the refund to our residents must go back to 2004. That's when we first started paying. We've loaned you the money since 2004. We're due that money. Part of what we had thought was that to obtain these funds, we would have to come in with our bills. But tonight it sounded like, no, that's not going to be the case. And on behalf of the association, I would say we would agree to pay the individual people, not the association. I don't want to take care of trying to figure that one out. But I think it's important that you really be fair to the residents of Grand Haven. And, you know, we talk with one another. And as Tom said, we are a large voting bloc. So be fair with us.
Mayor, Council, Chip Howden, resident of Grand Haven, and proudly graduate of Citizens Academy 2009. I don't think I need to echo everything everybody has said about fairness and when to go back. I do want to point out a couple of things, or at least raise the questions. I believe I've heard that some of the stormwater fees that have been collected have gone into a reserve for a blowout of some pipe. I'd like you to know that we imposed an increase on our internal Grand Haven fees to cover culverts of our stormwater system that haven't been taken care of for a number of years. So we were willing to really go back, raise our own fees to cover our own problems. And I'd ask the city to look at that and say, you know, really as part of that minimal refund that you gave to us, was any of that reserved to cover potential culvert fees that we are now imposing on ourselves? Number two, I'm quite surprised, maybe I shouldn't be, but to find out that the city does not have some kind of errors and omissions insurance that could cover some of this. Most cities and businesses that I know of do. It seems that an error was made and an error needs to be corrected. I am pleasantly surprised, I guess shouldn't be, because I called and spoke to a lovely young lady at the utility department the other day to ask her if I could get copies of my bills, because I thought I was going to have to bring them to you. So I'm glad you're not going to have to copy them so I can bring them back to you. But as far as, this leads to another question of fairness that's, if you pardon, is a little bit out of the stormwater area. I also learned, as you know, that you make a deposit for your water account in Palm Coast. And if you're a good paying citizen, you can get your deposit back after 23 months. But you don't give it to me. I have to ask for it. So now I learn, after moving here in 2005, that I not only have my deposit, I have quite sizable interest. I don't know whether it matches any other interest. And I think the only thing I can say about that is if you want to be fair to your citizens, whether they're Grand Haven or not, you look at how you structure your administrative operations. You give back deposits when they're earned, not when they're asked for. You give back overcharge fees back to when they should have been given back. Thank you.
Next speaker. Next speaker. Come on.
Jack, what are you doing back there?
My name is Jack Carroll, and I'm from Palm Coast. There is such a thing in this country that says a statute of limitation. So I'm bringing this up now. For a minor incident, usually the statute of limitation is 3 years. Now that's from 4 to 8, is a little beyond 3 years, so take that into consideration. Another thing is, I don't want to pay my taxes or my fees to give to somebody else. Now, no matter how you do it, I don't care. But as long as you don't take it from me, you can't take it from Paul to pay Peter, and I'm Paul. So, let's go with that.
Thank you, Jack.
Georgie Wanchu of Grand Haven. Well, I hear all the arguments here. I've just heard his, and yes, he definitely doesn't want to pay for someone else. But it looks like we have been doing it for some time. The problem is that you just have no idea how to raise the money. I know in Grand Haven, they'll assess us at a moment. We have a big storm, we're assessed. Now, what happens with Palm Coast? Can't you assess your people that are using the system? I mean, isn't there a blanket assessment could be made that'll bring you up to speed? That's the question. I mean, you're wondering whether you can borrow from these guys to pay these guys to shuffle to there, assess the people that are using the service. And I don't think that takes many legal aspects there. But while we're on that subject of paying and not, shall we say, getting the results, we have Colbert Lane. Grand Haven's been paying forever. When is that road going to be paid for? We now have a major highway. You can go there, you can watch. Mr. Policeman there will tell you. They're bumper to bumper on their way to Flagler Beach. Why do we have to pay for their road to get to Flagler Beach? Tell me that one. And we're paying year after year after year. Why don't somebody pay for all that wonderful road next to the Civic Center? I mean, who are you assessing there? Our taxes, that's who you're assessing. But you're assessing us for our road and the Civic Center, all right? So it really takes some looking into. When will we stop paying our overcharge for Culvert Lane and put it back to the county where it belongs? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Linda Jaros. I'm the facility manager for Town Center Medical, and I'm not part of Grand Haven, but I can feel for their plight because we're kind of feeling like we're in the same boat. I represent about 50 doctors in the Town Center Medical Building. We support the passage of this ordinance. We need something to be done. Yeah, and that's just kind of where we're at. Since March of 2008, we have paid over $22,000 for stormwater fees. And we're in a CDD that has their own stormwater facility. So we don't feel like we should be paying for this service. And we pay them an annual substantial sum for that service. So basically, we're paying the City of Palm Coast for a service that you're not even providing. So we're really happy to see that this ordinance has a provision for reduced service credit. We did pay the fees under protest because we felt like it didn't apply to us. But another concern that I have is for economic development for Palm Coast. I mean, we're just one commercial building in Town Center. Now, and we pay $700 per month for stormwater. So if there's a lot of empty lots in Town Center. If every one of them has to pay a minimum of $700, that's a hard sell, I think, for you to tell people, oh, yes, please come to our area, invest in your commercial property, and, oh, by the way, after you sign up for the land, you're going to have to pay $700-800 a month for that service. So, and I agree with Grand Haven as well that the credit should be retroactive to 2004. That's when we started paying these fees, before that April 2008 date. In addition, I feel like the credit should be issued to the original payer and not to the CDD. The CDD did not pay the fees, the property owners did. So, there we go. Yeah.
My name is Charlie Troutwine. I was a supervisor on the CDD for the last 5 years. I am just going to make a statement and not try to repeat everything that happened. Your obligation to take care of the people of Palm Coast, including Grand Haven. Do not treat us as a separate part that you can use as the golden goose. You took the money. We want the money. It's as simple as that. Your way of financing it, I know from being on a board when we were financing different things. I know that's a problem. But that's not the problem of the people and residents of Grand Haven. I just think it's an obligation, a moral obligation on your part, to come up with some kind of restitution for an illegally placed fee on our community. Thank you.
My name is Ophelia Byer, and I'm a resident at Grand Haven. And I would be remiss not to stand up here and just say my feelings. Sometimes I feel that we at Grand Haven are cash cows. We are not cash cows. A lot of us don't have kids. We have to pay taxes for the schools. We pay taxes for Colbert Lane, and there's not even any street lights out there. There's accidents and everything. It's like the city doesn't even care about that. But we should not always be put in a place of feeling like a cash cow.
Hello, my name is Bob Gilfillan. I'm on the board of directors for Covington Park, HOA. That's located down by the toll bridge next to the golf course. And I want to speak on behalf of myself that I support the ordinance. I also support going back to 2004 on payment. I do want to raise a question, though, about the ordinance, and I've read it thoroughly, and I see it doesn't address a subdivision like an HOA like Covington Park, where our stormwater system, and we have a retention pond and treatment, we pick up flow from Oaks subdivision, as well as a good part of Fairways and Palm Harbor Drive. The city's been collecting monthly fees from these other developments as well as Covington Park, and yet we pay for our own stormwater system, many times what we're paying to the city in monthly fees. So I'd like to see the ordinance speak to how a subdivision such as Covington Park would be compensated, and also in the future, because we're going to continue accepting their stormwaters besides what's within our development. Okay, thank you.
Next speaker. Last chance. Next speaker. Anyone? Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll close the public portion of the meeting. Come back to council. But first, I heard 3 questions, essentially one for the attorney. Is there any possibility that this would be covered under some sort of error and omission policy? That would presume that there's an error or an omission. Could you comment?
The city has coverage through the League of Cities. As for generally torts or other intentional negligence or intentional actions, it'd be my opinion, without further review of without receiving a formal opinion from the League of Cities, that this would not be the type of claim that would be covered by the insurance policy that we have with the League of Cities.
Okay. Mr. Landon or Mr. Moden or someone, Colbert Lane. My recollection is that County Road. Grand Haven is paying a bond that was part of the original agreement with Flagler County. What is the status of Colbert Lane? Whose responsibility is it? What do we know?
Colbert Lane is a county road. It is maintained by the county, and that's why you see a lower standard out there than what we have. As far as I don't mean that critical, but it is a different standard in the county than what we have, and yet it's in Palm Coast, and so people do not understand that. The bonds, once again, that was something that you all inherited. That was something that happened in order to build Colbert Lane. And just like your CDD, you're paying for a lot of the infrastructure. That was how that infrastructure was funded, but it is not something the city established. It is not something the city collects. I do not know when, because it's not a function of the city, I don't know when the bond will be paid off. And we do not maintain Colbert Lane.
Several years ago, as I recall, the county refinanced that bond to lower the costs. But that's an agreement with the developer and the county.
Yep.
The last question, Covington Park. Mr. Moden, I'm not familiar with the stormwater drainage, but it sounds like they're receiving stormwater from another drainage system into their drainage system. And how does this ordinance address their concerns?
There are provisions in the ordinance for credits. They would receive a credit because they have their own stormwater treatment system. And we would have to look at that system and see if it would be classified as part of the community-wide drainage system. If so, that part of the system becomes exempt. And we are doing that in other cases where somebody has a piece of land and part of the community-wide drainage system drains through it. That portion of the land that is utilized as a drainage system is exempt. So there are terms in the ordinance so that they will receive some type of credit.
Mayor, I need to clarify that, the exempt part. How the new fee is established, once again, depends on the size of your property, etc. When John says that the stormwater system may be exempt, it is that area that functions as stormwater. It's not all the residential property. We just won't charge that neighborhood for their stormwater system, that property, because it's all based on acreage, because acreage has to do with how much water runs off. So that is one of those things, like we've tried to describe. A true fee tries to calculate the impact on the system based on a number of factors. if it's a permitted system, and I believe it is, okay, John's confirming that, then that's one that those residents now will get a 23% discount on the fee because they have a permitted system. That's exactly what we're talking about here, is that it's not one flat fee across the board. It really depends on each individual circumstance.
And I don't want to try to speak for the gentleman from Covington Park, but it sounded to me as though his concern was they're maintaining their stormwater pond, and yet not all of the water in that pond is generated by Covington Park. Some of it comes from the Oaks. So,
and that's why we aren't going, if that's the case, you don't charge them for the pond area, and you give them a discount because they're actually contributing to the overall system. That's the whole point of, now, their residents, the residential property is also coming into the system, so there will be some fee, but it will be a reduced fee than what their neighbors would pay that don't have to maintain that system. So it's trying to be more fair. Is it exact science? Absolutely not, but it's trying to accommodate exactly those kind of issues when you have your own system that you're maintaining.
Okay. All right, back to council for additional questions, comments, or a motion. Mr. Meeker, you indicated you had some observations you wanted to share.
Well, I guess what I'll do is, since we're in the discussion period, I'll submit, for the council's consideration, my opinions on what we need to do, and then we can hash it out from there. The first one, should the stimulus check go back to 2004? I think it should. Should the method of distribution be made more user-friendly? Yeah, I think it should. I think we have other options where we could get a list of all those that have paid in and how much was paid in over time. And somebody comes into City Hall, shows proof of identity, and just like when you go voting.
That's how we're doing it now.
Well,
Okay.
this is my suggestion on how to make sure that it stays user-friendly, as opposed to requiring them to come in with copies of utility bills over the last 7 years or whatever. I'm certainly not interested in that. And I know Jim said that they're working on making it very user-friendly. This is just my idea. It's much like voter registration kind of a thing. When you go in to vote, you show them your driver's license, they check you off, and you're good to go. I also believe there should be a time limit, though, to secure the rebate. I don't think this should be left open indefinitely. To me, I'm used to regulatory dealings in which when a permit is going to be approved somewhere, you put a notice in the paper. The citizens who want to object to the issuance of that permit have a 30-day window. I'm not suggesting it 30. I'm just talking the way it is at the state level. If you miss that 30-day window, you can't object to the issuance of the permit anytime after that. So what I'd like to see is, I'm thinking in my mind, like a 90-day window to get this squared away and get moving. The discussion about the money provided, the CDD, for the reduced level of treatment or the aquatic weed spraying program, whether it was, I thought it was $10,000, I heard $12,000 tonight. I think that needs to be deducted from any reimbursement. The method of funding, well, I mean, not being in this year's budget, and my question is, where would we get the money to write the checks? We talked about the disaster reserve fund. We talked about the state revolving loan. We could set something up in a future budget or something like that. Do we want to lay off and cut levels of service? I do have an idea on how I'd like to see it rebated or given back, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The fairness issue that Mr. Lawrence mentioned, he said, call it a loan. Well, I'd like to pay back that loan, and I'd like to do it with a payment plan based on how it was collected, starting back in 2004. It wasn't collected in all one lump sum, and I don't think it's fair to come into the middle of a budget year, especially in tight, tough budget years where ad valorem values have been going down and we've had to whack the budget in a number of areas, and expect us in mid-budget to be able to come up with a huge sum of money to pay it out. Again, it wasn't collected that way. I think it should be redistributed back in a similar fashion. And 2 years ago, the subject came up about a $2 increase to the stormwater fee within the city. We didn't feel it was necessarily appropriate at the time. We thought we could handle it through other means, and I surely believe that in this year's budget, we're going to be discussing an increase in the stormwater collection fee. Those are my comments.
Mrs. DeStefano.
In order to settle the issue tonight, it is my understanding that if we as council decide to go back to '04, we would have to deal with that issue before we looked at the ordinance for passing. And I would like to recommend that we deal with that issue first and have council say, okay, we want to go back to that before we deal with the ordinance. Because if we're not going to go back to '04, then I don't see, then I call for the ordinance. But I think we have to be fair and equitable and somehow figure out how we're going to pay the bill and move on with life. Bear in mind, one of the most important thing is Grand Haven is the city. You are the city. You are a part of the city, and I want you to remember that. And we try to deal with everybody equal. And I do want you to take away today that Colbert Lane is not belong to Palm Coast. And if you have an issue, you all go down with your white blouses and go to the county. And there's a county commissioner here tonight. So that's where you need to take that issue. But I would like to suggest that we go back to the '04.
Okay. Let me just interject with a question for council. I am terribly concerned that this has taken us 3 years to resolve this. And it is just piling up debt, whether you go back to '08 or go back to '04 or any other number, you're still accumulating debt that we have agreed to repay. Is there a possibility of passing the ordinance with a rebate date of '08 and then after budget consideration amend, add an additional ordinance if it's the council's wish to pay additional rebates? Because absent that, this just gets delayed some more.
That's me?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Is that a possibility?
It's a legal possibility, yes, Mr. Mayor. The process would be is that you have an ordinance on second reading for your consideration this evening. It could be passed. And like any other ordinance, which is, is part of your code, it could come back as an amendment to your code.
Okay. So that is a possibility.
Mr. Mayor?
Let me give everybody a chance, please. Okay. Mr. Lewis?
On the ordinance itself, and it was mentioned that we've spent 3 years getting to this point. If we spent 3 years getting to this point, I'm not about to make a decision to look at something that we haven't even looked at in terms of going back to 4 years. I think we first have to take care of what's on the table. I don't think that we pay these people like this kind of money just for us to make split-second decisions on information that we do not have. I don't know what it will be to go back to '04. I haven't seen the numbers that tells me what the level of service or what it costs to do a bond or anything for '04. So I can't make a decision on something I don't know. But I do know what's in front of me in terms of this current ordinance. And although the others feel that we should go back to '04, I'm not as smart as they are. I need time. So I'm not going to make that decision tonight.
Mr. Moorman, any comments?
Yes, sir. I have to agree with Mr. Lewis on that one issue. It's tough. I'm looking at just the $700,000. We're looking at laying people off. That's my concern. We're putting some of these crews on the street, their families. These are tough times. We're talking about Palm Coast has the highest unemployment rate in the state of Florida, and we're going to add to it by throwing these gentlemen who go out and prepare the swells and do some of this work, the potential is putting some of these individuals on the street, even more people out there. And I'm not ready to add, if we're going to talk about adding another $1 million on top of that $700,000 that I'm looking at right now. You know, I'm people-oriented, and it hurts me to think that what we're going to do here without further study and try and come up with a resolution on, rather than putting people out on the street. I need some time to figure out how we can make this work without hurting our family. They're family. They're like your family. If this was somebody in your household, would you want them to be put on the street so that you could get a rebate for $8 a month or $35 a year or whatever you were paying to get that money back, and especially in one lump sum? And it's going to hurt some people. And I'm not ready to make that decision right now, because if that involves putting somebody on the street, putting them out of work, then I can't do that.
Mrs. DeStefano.
I agree with Mr. Lewis and Mr. Mormon, but that is why I'm saying we need to go back and study what effect it's going to be if we go back to 04. And we can't do that tonight, and we can't make that decision tonight. I also agree, I don't want to put people on the street, but on the other hand, we have to be fair and equitable to all of our citizens. And perhaps once we find out what it's going to take to do the 2004 rebate, we sit down at a workshop or at a meeting and show what it's going to be and how much it's going to cost and where we're going to get the money and what level of service we're going to have to pay for. I mean, it's unfortunate, but the residents deserve the money. They paid it in, and they deserve the rebate. Maybe they'll come along with us and say, okay, I see what it's doing, and maybe after tonight's meeting, they'll say, okay, we hear you, we'll just go back to 08. I understand what you want. I understand what you want. I understand what I want, and I can't have it, okay? But you have to look, if we go back to 04, if that's the council's decision, then we have to find out from budget and Mr. Moden and the manager, what's that going to do for stormwater? And okay, if you have a pipe, that breaks in Grand Haven, you take care of it. But you also use Palm Harbor, you use Palm Coast Parkway, you use Belterre, you use Old Kings. So all I'm asking,
please.
I listen to you, I'm asking you to listen to me. All I'm asking is for your consideration to give us time to find out what is going to be affected by the reverting back to the 04. That's all I'm asking. We can't make that decision tonight. If we decide as a council we'll go back to 04, we got to figure out the budget, where the money's going to come from. That's all I'm asking.
This is why I raised the question that I did. Council has been provided a rough draft memo from Richard Adams outlining several possible ways that you could accommodate the $700,000, the anticipated guesstimated $700,000 loss in revenues.
Right.
Cutting your swale program by 50%, cutting your pipe replacement program to zero, cutting your weir replacement program to zero, and just wait for the disaster to occur. You have those options. So there are ways of dealing with the 700,000 potential shortfall. My understanding, Mr. Landon, is that we have a reserve for uncollected debt or bad debt or something like that that would probably cover the rebates back to 08. So that doesn't require any additional study. My sense is to move this thing along, that we pass the ordinance as proposed with rebates to 08. As Mary DeStefano suggested, we're then going to have to take a look at what the additional cost 04, 5, 6, 7 would be, find out what that dollar amount is, make the necessary budget adjustments, come back and amend the ordinance or amend the whatever needs to be done, if that is the wish of council, to pay that period of time. But if we have to defer this ordinance for 2, 3, 4 months while we do budget revisions and agonize about whether we're going to lay people off, Mr. Mormon, or whether we're going to cut levels of service, the problem doesn't get any better, it just gets worse.
I'm ready to make a motion if there's no further discussion.
Is there any further discussion? Mr. Meeker.
Well, here's my whack at it, and we'll see how well I do. I'd like to motion to continue the ordinance for 2 months in order to allow the staff to provide a revised ordinance to address the following issues. Setting the stimulus check, I don't know. Well, we give them the money, they go spend it locally, all right. Anyway, have the checks go back to 2004, provide a user-friendly method of distribution with a time window open to apply for the rebate, whatever. Take into account the money that was previously spent from the rest of the citizens of Palm Coast in order to handle the lower level of service that was being provided. And in order to be fair, I just can't lobotomize what we need to do for the other 65,000 residents in Palm Coast to handle a one lump sum payment. So what I'd like to do is try to strike a balance. Again, since it wasn't collected in one lump sum, I'd like to pay it back in a similar order it was collected. I'd like to set it up for the budget year of 2011 and 2012. I just can't be making huge changes like this mid-budget. It just doesn't work that way. I agree that you guys should get your money back. I want to see you get your money back. I just am going to have to do it over time to do it. So that would be my motion.
Well, actually, the only appropriate motion is to table this ordinance for time certain. All the rest is suggestions for discussion in the interim, but the motion would be to table to
2 months
to continue.
I'd like to see a revised ordinance taking into account the issues that I brought forward, provided that the rest of the council agrees that that's the way we need to go.
Okay, so we have a motion to continue for a period of 2 months.
Mr. Mayor, just so we're on strong legal grounds from a notice standpoint, legally, we need a date certain. So if we could...
I'm sorry?
We need a date certain for the continuance, 2 months. If we could get a date from the city clerk on when that would approximately would be 2 months from now at a business meeting. I guess the first meeting in May 2nd. Thank you.
Is that the gist of your motion?
That'll work, Mr. Mayor.
To continue until May 2nd. Is there a second to Mr. Meeker's motion? Is there a second to the motion? Motion dies for lack of a second. Is there an addition?
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Mayor, that we move to accept this reading, this motion, or rather this ordinance, and that we look at the necessary framework needed to review and if necessary, refund those funds going back to 2004 after we have done the proper research.
The motion is to approve the ordinance as proposed with the understanding that we will address the issue of 2004, 2008 as expeditiously as possible because we need to get this resolved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to point out from a standpoint of practicality, in the section in the ordinance that is being proposed this evening, dealing with historical technical adjustments, it currently provides that the request for the credit is by application, which shall be completed and filed with the city within 6 months from the effective date. And the reason I bring that to your attention is that...
That is not the intent, as I understand it, of management.
Well, this was consistent with the intent of the ordinance at the time that it was prepared and discussed. It's just that this evening we're moving potentially in a different direction, and I'm worried that that might be difficult to achieve, since that would be what you're passing, and at the same time, moving forward, you might have to go through and do a credit through 2008, and depending on what this council may do in the future, go through the same process again from 2004 to 2008. So
Mr.
just pointing it
Land,
out.
wasn't, in your initial presentation, didn't you say that the rebate, the refund, whatever we want to term it, would be provided as a credit against existing utility bills, or, absent that, if somebody wants a check, to ask for a check? But they're for residential purposes, there's no application, at least that was what I understood you to be proposing.
Yes, well, there still has to be the request. Okay, and what we're saying is that I don't need a request from every resident. The homeowner association can make the request and say that we want, representing our neighborhood, we want you to give the credit to individual customers, and then we would give each individual customer the credit. Mr. Reichman points out what Mr. Meeker's whole point was, is that request has to come in within 6 months, or else you can't come back 10 years from now and say, oh, by the way, I want my...
Has to be closure.
I get the sense from the audience that that request would be in our hands tomorrow morning.
Yes. And then secondly, just to clarify, we will, this ordinance goes into effect May 1. Guys, is it possible to do it April 1 to move this thing forward?
I instructed my staff to start working on this afternoon, so we're already working on it.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is we need to get the credits out as quickly as possible to the residents through 08, and then commitment is that we will start working on how we're going to make it happen for 04 and bring that back, and that's going to be part of a budget discussion, etc. But I don't think you want to wait to get the credits out that you're approving through
Absolutely not.
08 and get that moving. And if you would amend the motion to say it goes in effect April 1, then people won't have to pay an April bill, and we'll get it out as quickly after that as possible. I think that's what City Council's asking for.
So amended.
Is that your motion, Mrs. DeStefano?
Yes, I guess what I'm just trying to say, that we know we have the money. We have the money from 08, okay? And all I'm asking is tolerate this part of it. Give us an opportunity to sit down and workshop our budget and figure out how we go back to 04. That's my comment.
Okay.
Call for the vote.
That was your motion. That was as amended or as restated by the city attorney, Mrs. DeStefano. It's acceptable to you?
Yes.
Any other discussion on the motion?
Just so we're clear for the record, the changes from that which is in the agenda package is that the effective date of the ordinance will be April 1st rather than May 1st.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Call the question.
Roll call vote, please.
Vice Mayor Meeker?
Boy, I wish I felt comfortable with this, but I don't.
Councilmember
No.
DeStefano?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Mormon?
Yes.
Mayor Nets?
Yes.
Mayor, this motion is passed 4-1.
Thank you very much.
Take a break.
All right, let's take a 5-minute recess, if we may. All right, let's reconvene the meeting. And this brings us to agenda item number 7, a resolution on the stormwater fee schedule. Mr. Landon.
The second part of the discussion, where'd they all go? Yeah.
Not yet.
Mayor, City Council, you know, it was enlightening to talk to a few people, and I'm going to add this. I know they're all gone now, but I thought we made this pretty clear that you know, this isn't just about Grand Haven, and people couldn't understand where do you get $1 million, $1.5 million. The real winners here will be the developers and the large commercial property owners that are the ones that will get the biggest refund when you go back to '04. Because it has to be citywide, so it's a very challenging issue as you dive into it. It's not a simple issue. I offered to go talk to the homeowners association and see if we can't assure them, number one, would try to get the refund back to them as quickly as possible, but we have to be realistic and talk to them in more detail. All right, the resolution is really the second part of this, where you actually, the ordinance says that you will establish the fees via a resolution. We are, this resolution does really 3 things. It adopts the $8 per what we call ERU, equivalent of a residential unit. That is the same rate that we currently charge. It also adopts the proposed rate structure. This is where you have all the credits and exemptions we talked about. That is new, and it's consistent with the ordinance and the technical report. And then lastly, it establishes a $60 deposit for appeals. As you may recall, that we will now calculate each stormwater fee for each property. And if the property owner, once they get the notice as to what their fee will be, they will have an opportunity to provide us with new information or appeal that fee, very similar to what you would do with your appraised value. When the property appraiser at the county sends you a notice that this is appraised value, you can appeal that. We have suggested a $60 deposit that if they provide information and we change the fee, then they get the deposit back. If they do not have a case to change it, then we would keep the $60. And that's consistent with our discussions before. But that is what is accomplished by this resolution. It's directly associated with the ordinance you just adopted.
Council questions? Seeing none. Let's open the meeting to the public. Anything from the public wish to be heard on agenda item number 7?
Carroll, Palm Coast. At the last meeting, you voted to give these the stockholders, or whatever you want to call them, right, a 95% credit. And in the same tone of voice, I heard you say that they weren't going to raise our fees. Now, if you give them, I might be wrong, but if you give them 95%, the bottom line showed an increase that we would pay $9 and change. So you're taking our money and you're giving it to them, so they can get a decrease in their payments, but it's going to come out of the people from Palm Coast's pocket. So we're getting an increase of $1 and some odd, but I forget what it was, 96 cents or something, while they're getting a decrease of 95%. So we increase 25%. You're shaking your head, but that's what I understand. I'm saying, I might be wrong.
Mary, please.
I could be wrong, but that's what I understand I heard. So you voted for the 90%, 95%, because that it gives them a decrease. of 95%, so they're going to pay on 5%. I'm paying $8 plus $1 and change, which gives me a 25% increase. So you show me where it's fair, how we are not going to, we going to benefit. You're giving them everything, and you're taking it all from us to give it to them. That is welfare for the rich.
Thank you. Next speaker. Next speaker. Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll come back to council. Mr. Landon, would you comment on that? It's not quite that simple because, as I understand it, the 95% reduction is a reduction in a fee that they're not currently paying.
Well,
at least in some cases.
In some cases, if you recall, this is what, you know, why this has been so complicated, because there were some large bulk vacant lands, that's what we call them, the large tracts, that they had platted, right, and those were paying. Those will now get, it depends on the situation, not all of them, because if there is a swale system, et cetera, that we're maintaining, this really changes the ball game on just about everybody except for the original ITT residential areas, where right now we're still proposing $8. Can you maintain the same level of service at $8, meaning all the pipe work and the swell work and the weirs and valley gutters that we've gotten started, and our projections come true where we're going to have at least $700,000 shortfall? No. And then that's where City Council, during the budget process, will have to make a decision. There's an option not to increase the fees, but to decrease the operation, or keep the same operation and make up the shortfall by a fee increase.
Or subsidize stormwater from general revenues.
Yes,
and it's probably going to be some admixture of all three.
Yes. Those discussions, you know, and I guess that's the whole point, and that's what you already know, is that this is a very, very difficult issue, and you're not finished. Your job is still ahead of you to work all through this. Leaving it alone was not an option. The courts told us that. Getting to a final resolution, you're still 6 months away probably with budget, and hopefully after budget, then we'll pretty well get settled in. Hopefully that answers the question. There's no guarantee you're going to get a rate increase, but we're going to have changes.
There's no guarantee you won't either. So.
Right.
For Mr. Carroll's benefit, what this rate proposal is would keep the $8. It would not raise to $9 and whatever, but with the understanding that that means there's going to be less revenues, and we're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. Additional council comments? Is there a motion?
I'll motion to approve the agenda item.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? I'm opposed. Nay. For the same reason I was opposed last time. Okay. This brings us to our consent agenda, items 8 and 9. A motion passes 4-1, I'm sorry. Consent agenda, items 8 and 9. Does anybody want to remove anything from the consent agenda? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I'll motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries that objection. This brings us to the public participation portion of the meeting. Anyone wish to speak on any item not on today's agenda? Going once? Going twice? Seeing no one approach the public portion, the podium, we'll close the public portion and come back to council. Discussion by City Council on matters not on the agenda. Mr. Mormon, why don't we start with you?
Nothing, sir.
Mr. Lewis?
Not now.
Mrs. DeStefano?
Nothing.
Mr. Meeker?
At some point in time, I'd like to know if we can discuss the number of inspections that we require on land clearing activities. Prior to going real vertical on any project, sewer installation, draining system installation, stuff like that, it seems like that at every turn, contractors are having to place phone calls into the city to get the inspector out there. And of course, each inspection carries its own individual fee. And I'm kind of wondering if we can't lump a lot of these individual inspections into one inspection and make one phone call to get it done.
I think we already did that.
That was the major changes that we've made and had that discussion. Yes, one of the changes is because we now have consolidated. This is where we eliminated a lot of inspectors and laid a lot, well, not a lot, but we laid people off, that we no longer have inspectors that just drive by and say, oh yeah, I'm here. That we are requiring everybody to call it in because we don't have the same kind of staff we used to. Before, we had 3 or 4 different departments that do it. Now we basically have one. And the change, and some of them are complaining, is I never had to call in for inspection before for the horizontal work, not the vertical work, but the horizontal work. But we have much fewer,
less.
We have a great deal less number of inspectors, and we have consolidated it so it's not a variety of departments. If you recall, we had stormwater, we had utility, we had building, we had, I think, 4 or 5. And we had that whole, remember, Nestor did that whole chart with how we proceeded with that. Obviously, we'd be happy to show you again, but I think that major change been quite successful. But people who didn't used to have to call in now has to. I guess we still have some of those complaints, but
well, I'm looking at a list from January. Stormwater structure placement, stormwater pipe replacement, stormwater structure/pipe attachment, stormwater end sections, stormwater retention/detention, rough, stormwater retention, detention stabilized, stormwater retention, detention final. Do we really need all of those?
Were they all done at one time?
Those are all individual inspections.
Once again, it depends on the project.
Do you inspect the house after it's finished, or do you inspect it before the drywall goes up?
And many of it is they want to cover it up. And before they cover it up, you got to go out and look at it. And each one of them is unique. It may sound like a lot, but if that's the hospital, you think about all the different areas they have going on out there, and out by the highway, 100, the I-95. Yeah, it's to make sure that it's all done correctly. There's going to be a lot of inspections. But is that? I got to get a kick out of if it's done correctly, that's a good thing. That's the service we're providing. If it's not being done correctly, then we catch it. It's a whole lot better than me having to hire somebody right now to repair my house because the contractor didn't do the dryer vent correctly. And I'm dealing with that one, and I'm upset because our inspector didn't catch it. Well, we didn't do enough inspections on my house, as far as I'm concerned, but everybody else complains we did too much. So yeah, you can't win on these, I guess is what the point is.
Anything else?
Okay, that'll do.
Just one thing for the public's benefit. This Friday and Saturday, March 4th and 5th, Friday from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. and Saturday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., all of the elected officials in the county, the school board, county commissioners, the 5 cities, the builders, Home Builders Association, the Board of Realtors, Enterprise Flagler, and I probably missed a few groups, Chamber of Commerce, will be meeting at the Agricultural Extension Service Building in Bunnell for the purposes of this Economic Development Summit. The reason the location was changed to the larger room was to allow public attendance, not necessarily public participation, although I anticipate that the chairman will probably provide some opportunity for the public to speak. So if you're interested in hearing a multitude of ideas about what economic development means within Flagler County, come on out March 4th and 5th.
Mayor, could I
Lunch to be served.
maybe add that the two citizens representatives update council on that?
Yes, council, at our workshop, we had several nominations. We have selected and they have accepted Rich Smith and
Mr. Walsh, wasn't it?
John Walsh.
John Walsh. So they will be representing the public, or at least a portion of the public from Palm Coast. Each of the other entities will also be bringing in two representatives, so we will have a nice cross-section of our community. That's all I have. Discussion by city attorney of matters not on the agenda.
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Discussion by city manager of matters not on the agenda.
I attended my first school board meeting this morning, and very happy to report that they did approve FiberNet, City FiberNet, for their connectivity for all their facilities. That was one of the ideas of us building out the system. And we now have a contract. Well, you have to approve it, but that was the first step. And a lot of hard work went into that. And also Lux Communication received their internet service, which is a direct result of our discounted rate. And it will save the school district over the 3-year contracts in 6 figures. And it will keep those tax dollars that they spend on this here in Palm Coast. So it's really a very positive win for all, and that will be coming your way for final adoption. O2, we signed a typical contract with them to use FiberNet, like we're doing throughout, and that started their due diligence or engineering, if you will, on the tower sites. So they are now working on where exactly the towers would go. For the audience, O2 is a wireless provider. They have been approved by FCC, and there's actually been some news releases out there that they are planning and are working to come to Palm Coast to provide internet and TV service. In other words, they got FCC, the Federal
Communications Commission.
Yes, everybody just knows them as FCC. They have received approval from them to basically be another option for our residents and businesses for internet service. But it would be, you take your laptop and go to your home, to your office, or out to see your kid's ball game at the park, and you will be able to get connected through their service. And they will also have a TV option, so another option there for people that I think everybody's in agreement that competition is pretty good in this arena. They still have some work to do. It's still not a done deal, but they have made the announcement they're coming to Palm Coast so they can work everything out. The other benefit for us is that they will need to rent more space off of our cell towers. So the city will gain some more revenue there also, so that's a good thing.
More importantly, they're a big supporter of soccer, either in the German Bundesliga or the European Premier League. It's on the logo. I'm ready for it.
Thank you. Mr. Landon, anything else?
No, that's all
I do have one. I'm sorry, I did forget one thing. Because City Council will be at this Economic Development Summit on Saturday, we will not be able to attend the opening day of Little League. But for those of you who are not really thrilled with listening to a bunch of economic development stuff, turn out to Indian Trail Sports Complex and watch the throwing out of the first ball and the introduction of this year's Little League teams. Great experience.
It was really cool. I was thrilled that I even got it to the catcher with some reasonable speed last year. But
one bounce for me, but that's okay.
I was worried about throwing it in the dirt over his head or something.
Okay. Mr. Meeker.
Motion to adjourn the meeting, sir.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you for your attendance.